Alrighty, in this video we are going to talk about masks and scroll views. So a mask allows us to mask out certain pixels from being rendered by using an image, which is known as a mask. Then scroll views allow us to scroll around oversized content from within their parent rectangle. Scroll views are actually technically interactable components, but I decided not to talk about scroll views or scroll bars in the previous video because they really only come to play once we start using masks. I also want to show a couple techniques that we can use masks effectively to create some really cool transition effects. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started, and first just talk about masks. I'm going to come up here, just like always, into my hierarchy and create a canvas. Switch over to an orthographic scene view by selecting the 2D button, and zoom out so I can get a good view of my UI. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a panel. If I can, UI panel. Then I'm going to make it a little smaller. I'm not going to worry about anchoring in this video, at least not yet. Then what I'm going to do is underneath this panel, I'm going to create another panel. But this panel, I'm going to oversize. So you'll notice that although this panel is a child of the panel below it, it is bigger than the panel that we can see. Let's go ahead and change its color. I'm going to give it a kind of reddish color so we can start to sort of differentiate between the two panels we have. So the gray panel is the parent and the red panel is the child. Now the behavior of allowing a child to overstep the bounds of a parent can typically allow you to do some really cool stuff, like have like little elements, popping in and out, blah, 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 all that fun stuff. But it isn't necessarily always what you want. Sometimes you want to constrain the viewport of a child to the parent's bounds. We can make this even more apparent, or this demonstration even more apparent, by introducing some more controls into the child panel. In this case, I'm going to throw in some arbitrary buttons, using Control D to duplicate them, creating a nice little row of buttons here. So what we want to be able to accomplish is effectively making it so that this panel, this child panel, is constrained by this bounds of the parent panel as far as what is rendered and what is not. It's a very easy thing to do because I can hop right into this parent panel. I can say add component. I can type in mask and hit enter. And that's it. Now I can click on the child panel and I can move him around, and you notice that he doesn't actually render unless he's within the image of the parent. Now there's a couple really important things about masks to be aware of. First of all, masks are going to be determined by the image component on the same game object. So in this case we have a source image of background. If I instead change the source image to pop-up arrow or check mark even, you'll notice we have this rather ugly sort of mask here. Obviously, this pop-up arrow was never intended to be used as a mask, but we can see that we have an interesting shape being used here. You'll notice that the mask behaves like an all or nothing. Either the pixel's filled and the child is rendered, or the pixel's not filled and the child is not rendered. You'll also notice another interesting aspect of masks, and that is their fill center. By unchecking fill center, you'll notice that although the masking behavior, I clicked on the wrong panel. I meant to click on the parent and say show mask graphic. You'll notice by unchecking show mask graphic that we're still getting the behavior of the mask, but it's no longer displaying the actual image that's a part of that mask. Remember, the image is determined entirely by the image component that is on the same game object as the mask component. So again, I can go ahead and let me go ahead and show mask graphic again and change my source image back to a background, because it'll be a little bit more apparent here. In fact, I can come up here and make the background of the parent blue, further showing what happens when I uncheck show mask graphic. Coming back up into the parent, I can uncheck Show Mask Graphic, and you notice that the blue background completely disappears. You'll also notice that we do get this nice little rounded corner effect because the background image that's used on this panel does have a rounded corner. So masks can be used for a variety of effects and cool transitions and all that fun stuff. For example, if I were to take the this panel right here, and this panel, if I were to take this and move it from 0 pixels high and move it down, notice how it kind of expands on that. So if I were to animate this motion, for example, we could have a pop down, sort of just popping down on the showing the child element. So yeah, I mean there's really not a whole lot more to talk about masks. They're just a really nice way to achieve certain effects. And you can use them as pop downs, you can use them pop overs, blah blah blah. It's really straightforward stuff. All you need to know is that the mask will prevent the pixels of the children from rendering if they do not fall within the opaque pixels within the corresponding image. So that's really cool, but what about scroll views? So for example, we have this panel right here, and we have this child panel in here, and the child panel is oversized. We can see that's oversized very clearly. In fact, it would be a little bit more obvious if we went ahead and even duplicated some more of these buttons. And we can start to see how really big this child actually is. We want to be able to scroll around in this view to be able to access all of the content from within it, but still maintaining our mask. To do that, we simply use the scroll rect control. So if I come up here to the parent panel and add component and add in a scroll rect, and then I take this child panel and assign it to the content of the scroll rect, now when I hit play, notice how I can scroll around by just clicking and dragging. So this would allow us, for example, to see a help window that has a bunch of text. I mean, I can show that example as well by, I'm going to go ahead and recreate this, just so you guys can see the whole process of creating a scroll rect with a mask. I'm going to come up here to Canvas, create UI panel. This is going to be the parent panel. Then underneath this panel, I'm going to create UI text. This will be the child. The child I'm going to make very large. Then I'm going to bump up its font size, and then I'm going to take this text, this is help text, and I'm going to copy and paste it a bunch so we can see that this is truly an oversized child. So that's the first step. The next step is let's go ahead and add the scroll rect. Let's add the scroll rect before we add the mask so we can see what the effect of the scroll rect has in the absence of a mask. In the parent, I'm going to add a scroll rect component. Then on the scroll rect component, I'm going to click and drag text into the content. That's all I need to do. Now when I hit play, I can scroll this text. You'll notice that I can't scroll horizontally, but that's because this text does not overflow horizontally. If it did, for example, if I came up here to the child and increased his width, and we hit play, you'll notice we can now scroll both horizontally and vertically. You might be asking how I can make it so that the size of this text element is fit perfectly with the content that it contains. We'll be looking at that in the next video. But for now, we can see exactly how the scroll rect is being used. Then, all we have to do to complete this example would be to come in here to the panel, add component, and type in mask. By doing that, we have not only created an interactable scroll rect, but we've also masked out the overflow. Now when we hit play, we see that it's properly masked out. Let's say we wanted to add some padding in here. There'd be a variety of ways to add padding, but what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to separate the concept of the scroll rect from the concept of the panel. Or the concept of the mask from the panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and on canvas I'm going to create a new panel. Then I'm going to take this old panel, dump it into that one. Now this panel that has the mask on it, I'm going to remove Show Mask Graphic. Then I'm going to make it stretch, and I'm going to give it a padding of 10 in each dimension. Now you can see by nesting panels and removing the Show Mask Graphic, we can achieve some level of padding. All right, some more interesting things we can do with scroll rects. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select the panel that has the scroll rect on it, and I'm going to hit play. Then I'm going to play around with some of the parameters that we can use. For example, we can disable horizontal scrolling entirely. Even if the child overflows horizontally, we can still not scroll like that. We can also do the same thing with vertical scrolling by just unchecking vertical. We can change the movement type from unrestricted, which, just like it says, means it's unrestricted. We can scroll as much as we want in any direction. We can go to elastic, which is what we saw before, giving us this little iPhone-y type feel. Or we can go to clamped, and clamped gives us a more traditional sort of clamped scroll. We also have our deceleration rate, which we can set to 0, which will prevent the ability to flick. If we set the deceleration rate to 1, for example, you'll notice that I can flick and it slowly decelerates. Okay, so really there's not a whole lot to talk about scroll rects. They're very interesting, very powerful, but there's not a lot to them. The last important thing to understand about scroll rects is how they interact with scroll bars. Scroll bars are really just special controls that can be plugged into a scroll rect. Now you could most certainly use a scroll bar in the absence of a scroll rect, but you would usually most likely be better off using a slider instead. Scroll bars are really designed for this sort of behavior. So let's go ahead and add in a horizontal and a vertical scroll bar. To do this, I'm going to take my padding and I'm going to increase the bottom padding up to 30. This is to facilitate the existence of a horizontal scroll bar. Then I'm going to increase the right padding by 30 for the vertical scroll bar. Now in the parent panel, I'm going to right-click, go to UI, and select scroll bar. You'll notice that we get this. I'm just going to place this where I think it looks good. Maybe nudge it down just a tad. Then I'm going to click and drag it over so we have it like that. And now we have a horizontal scroll bar. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click panel, hit UI, hit scroll bar, and I'm going to change it to go from top to bottom. Right there, just like what we do with the slider. Then I'm going to position it in a similar fashion to my horizontal scroll bar. Doesn't look perfect, but again, I am not a designer. Okay, so now if I hit play, you'll notice that they really don't do anything quite yet. They just act like scroll bars, but they're not plugged into anything. Now, we could most certainly click on the scroll bar and start playing around with its event list and all that fun stuff. Or we can come in here to the scroll rect and associate each scroll bar with its appropriate parameter. So for the horizontal scroll bar, I'll associate the horizontal scroll bar. For the vertical scroll bar, I'll associate the vertical one. I believe I do have the vertical one backwards, so I'm going to change it from bottom to top. Now I'm going to hit play, and you'll notice that these scroll bars actually respond to the scroll rect. They even let me control the scroll rect. And again, that association just comes from clicking on the scroll rect and setting the horizontal and vertical scroll bar properties. All right, so that's pretty much scroll bars, or scroll rects anyway. Let's take a little deeper look at the scroll bar itself, just because this is a selectable that we did not talk about in the previous video. You'll notice I completely messed up my layout because my docking isn't correct. Let's go ahead and fix my docking. We'll do that, and then for these guys, we will dock to the right-hand side and stretch. Then for these guys, we will dock to the bottom and stretch. So now when we change the size of our canvas, those rect transforms behave appropriately. Okay, so a scroll bar is made up of an image right here, which constitutes the background. It's also made up of the scroll bar script. The scroll bar script can be interactable or not. It has its transition, which behaves in the exact same way as the transitions of our other elements. You'll notice its target for the transition is the handle subgame object. It has its normal navigation. It has a handle rect, which is very similar to our slider rect. And it has a direction, a value, a size, and a number of steps. And that's really about it. Other than that, we have the sliding area. The sliding area is just an empty game object with no visual representation. And then we have the handle, which is just an image in a canvas renderer. So really dissecting the scroll bar looks very similar to our sliders, just visually a little bit different. So yeah, I'm thinking that pretty much is what I wanted to talk about. Again, now that we've talked about rect transforms, we've talked about selectables and all that fun stuff, most of that knowledge just carries over into everything else in the system. So yeah, I just want to point out again that that masking is a very, very cool technique and allows you to pull off some really cool transition effects. Just imagine animating this, for example. But I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. So we'll see you guys in the next video.